Grouping by achievement is a very complex and imprecise practice that we seem to have a great deal of confidence in as an efficient way to handle individual differences in learning settings. It turns out that there's very little evidence that that theory is effective in the way we practice it in schools.
Or excessive grouping has persisted for a very long time for a number of reasons. One is that I think many teachers just see it as convenient. You know, if you have a group of kids who are not so far apart from each other, they think that it's easier to teach. I think in many cases there's pressure from the parents or advocates of the high-achieving children who are often in favor of having children who are high-achieving be separate from others. But I think that there's kind of a well-meaning belief that instruction should be as targeted to each individual child's needs as possible. And I think many people then take the next step to imagining that the only way to do that is to have children physically separated from each other, either within class or into separate classes.
Well, when you look empirically at the characteristics of children in classrooms, children are extraordinarily diverse in all sorts of ways. And if you group them on one characteristic, you're going to have a huge amount of diversity and variation on other characteristics. So first of all, we fool ourselves into thinking that we've got homogeneous groups of students. So then when we target instruction, rather than thinking about always differentiating instruction to just recognize and acknowledge students' differences as being normal, whenever we do that targeting, we are then limiting the possibilities for learning for all of the children. So we have a practice that's very popular, very common, that's based on a flawed theory and for which there's almost no evidence of effectiveness.
Heterogeneous grouping in some ways is a misnomer because homogeneous grouping probably really isn't real. I mean, the only way that I could group a kid and say that I'm grouping them and they're all the same is if they need a particular skill or strategy. Other than that, everybody's really different. I mean, every reader's different. They bring different schema, different cultural experiences to each page. If I'm going to be doing homogeneous grouping, it has to be for a real specific purpose. With respect to heterogeneous grouping, as it involves or implicates race and language and culture, I would say that it's a very good thing to do. Everything has to be done in balance. If I'm going to put a kid in a group for an instructional purpose, I better have a sound reason for it. If I'm going to ask kids to get into groups based on interest, they ought to have very clear conceptions of how they view their interests given the text that I might be providing. So everyone has to be clear about what group we're going into at a particular time and why we're doing it. That's the most important thing.
Students shouldn't be separated for long periods of time in any case, and that if you had a grouping plan that you were using that caused children to be separated by performance, and that it so happened in that school that separating children by performance also separated them by ethnicity or language background or what have you, it would give you a very strong message that this is not a good thing to do.
Flexible grouping by definition means that you're not trapped in the same group all the time. I mean, that's it, period. So teachers have to monitor how kids are moving from group to group or whether they're trapped in a group. We want kids who seem to belong to certain groups by virtue of their own choice or how we put them in there. We want to break down those boundaries and move them around. So if I have a group of kids who I pulled together to do a little mini lesson on how to infer while you read and how to keep track of what you're thinking using Post-its, then I want to make sure that that kid doesn't remain in the same skills-based group day after day after day. So it's all about balance, it's all about flexibility, because the more flexibility you bring to your approach, the greater the kids learn from each other.